I love the opportunity to promote our bills and look forward to working with the Senate as well from the House side on very important issues, including this one. Mr. Broom and Ms. Wiggins, thank you very much for sharing your personal experience and the vulnerability to come in and provide some guidance to lawmakers from the experience that you had as children online. Mr. Broom, I do want to clear one thing up because I take very seriously the testimony that is put on this record and how 20, 30 years people will look at what we said. And you mentioned force, fraud, or coercion. And I want to clarify, when you said that, you meant over the age of 18, because as you know, in Texas, you are a victim of sexual exploitation and human trafficking if you are caused by any means under the age of 18. And so I knew you knew that, but I didn't want somebody to listen to your testimony and think that that was the only definition. And you're right, force, fraud, and coercion is for an adult, and that can have a lot of meanings. Most people think it means putting in shackles or held in a room. But what I'm always moved by with victims that I've gotten to work with is the mental side, the fraud. And most of that mental manipulation was seeded when they were kids earlier in life. And you talked about exposure pornography at a young age. And I would bet if anybody had asked you at the time if you were freely and knowingly doing it, you would have said yes, right? Sure. I'm doing this on my own. But today, you recognize that you were taken advantage of as a child, being exposed to something by somebody who should have known better or protected you, and it has drastically changed your life. Would you talk to us, because you said something so important. You said you are an anomaly and that so many other folks didn't make it out. Will you tell us again, how has what happened to you as a child, how does that impact you on a daily basis today as an adult who obviously is doing very well?
Yeah, I would say in addition to the force, fraud, and coercion, so I work for large companies like Penthouse and Hustler, and they had, again, so teen being one of the primary niches that they shot a lot of. Well, there was a series called Barely Legal, and girls would show up on their 18th birthday. So if they showed up on their 18th birthday, what was the flight that was arranged? What was the conversation that was had prior to their 18th birthday? So I would say that force, fraud, or coercion did not happen post 18. It happened before, and that was almost 20 years ago on Craigslist, and how they would be photoshops. There were photo shoots that were advertised. They would show up to a photo shoot, and then they would ask to do one thing, and then another, and then when they were told to stop, and this is coming from pretty much every girl that was in the industry with, they showed up for a photo shoot. They did more than they wanted to do. When they said they wanted to stop or they wanted to leave, the photographer would say the same thing. I'm going to post these photos anyway. Your life is going to be ruined, and if you don't continue, then I'm not going to pay you. So that certainly sounds like force, fraud, or coercion to me. But in
or it was caused by any means.
Right.
And the minute they turned 18, the law changed.
Yeah.
But as a prosecutor, I would look at the totality of the circumstance leading up to that time,
amen.
right?
Amen.
And I would recognize the introduction that was made to that individual under the age of 18.
Amen.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would say, like, to the extent where, I'm 40, and it's, I've been out of the industry for 11 years, and there should be people that I knew that were alive today. And there's 40 people that I was in the industry with that financially they were very successful, yet they've died of either overdose or self-harm. Every roommate I've ever had dead. And then there's a number around 500 over the last 25 years when you add in murder and things like that. And it's because you believe the lie that you cannot change. And again, that industry based, it's built upon manipulation. So this is not something you do, this is who you are, and when it becomes who you are, there's nothing else you can do. And I think that's why consent's so important. Every time I would film a scene, the consent was filmed prior to. Do you consent to X, Y, and Z? why would you film it before? Well, they would manipulate the guys and the girls and then say, hey, we don't want you to have the extra time to redo your makeup and all this. So while you're not disheveled, let's go ahead and film this consent for what you've already done, yet you have not yet done. And then they have the video consent. You have the documentation that, of course, you don't read. Mm-hmm. And what happens is 5-10 years goes by, and there's not a day that's gone by that myself or my wife hadn't got some kind of image via social media. There's over 1,000 fake accounts of me on multiple social media, and there's really nothing I can do about that. I'm 11 years removed from that. I did over 1,000 scenes, but there's probably 100,000 pieces of content. When you sign a release, what you don't read in the fine print is that we're going to sell this to as many third parties as we desire, and they partition the content. So I found myself on dating websites, on sex toys, and I never was compensated for that. I was never, asked for permission for that. There's no, you don't get royalties. You don't get residual payments. You're a one-time, you get paid a one-time fee. You're an independent contractor, and you get, a one-time fee. Yet there's still stuff on the internet today. But to answer your question that you asked in the beginning, well, what the industry does is that when someone would die of suicide, they would make a compilation of their films and say, this is an attribute to, but we know how attention is monetized. So they would take the very tragedy which led to their demise and monetize it. So that's the industry in which we live.
And you mentioned earlier the idea that even in filming, they would try to make the girl look as young as possible. And I know from my time prosecuting these cases, even where 2 children were being sold, photograph of 2 together, one had braces, one didn't.
Yeah.
The repeated text message from the Johns, the buyers, was, I want the ones with braces. And so you're right, that industry and that visual that is being shown to you is creating an appetite to physically perform by the buyers and the Johns. And Miss Wiggins, I want to ask, if you don't mind, because you talked about knowing folks who have been victims within the human trafficking world, from what you know and what you do, is this just something you get over, or is this something that you carry with you?
No. So I know to this day, like, I have personally a very hard time making connections with men in general. Not even romantic, but I mean, I've met someone who I now look at like a big brother, but like just being alone with him longer than like 5 minutes without his wife being around, I just I couldn't do it. Like, I had all these thoughts, and I would just become very anxious that he would try to manipulate me or something would happen. And like to this day, I work at the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD, and my youngest client is 7. And I've received like complaints from their mom that they're on chat sites and dating sites. And I think right now, like, that's something really hard that I have to deal with, and it's hard to step aside from that because I was there, I was that child, and just trying to help them while also remain grounded in like where I am right now in my life. But I would definitely say those have been the hardest things, just trying to create genuine connections with people without feeling like I'm going to be taken advantage of.
Yeah. And you mentioned the chat and a 7-year-old, and we know vulnerable populations, pimps, exploiters, they'll go where they are.
Yeah.
If they're in a mall, if they're in a school, if they're online, they'll find a way to get there. And you probably know as well that there's language or lingo within that community, like I keep throwing out, Johns, pimps, tricks, licks, right? Roses, the blade, all these things that we know people that want to buy and engage in this contact will use. And they flat out use them right there online, don't they? Yeah. And you mentioned it. If I try to put a song on a post that's copyrighted, within seconds, they've created an algorithm to say, no way. And yet they don't mind allowing these terms. I got cut off. It is big tech. Bring it back. All right, we're back. All right. They don't mind allowing these terms to not function as the same block to say, we're not letting this pimp on this island over here contact this 8-year-old over here. And you've seen it.
Yes, there's been multiple times I've been on Instagram or TikTok, and someone will be like, "Let me trick you out," and I'm like, "Oh."
And you know what that means, right?
Yeah.
And if we all know what that means, certainly the brilliant minds at the companies, they know what it means. And just in the same way they cut down the potential for a lawsuit on a copyright infringement, they could sure shut this down in an instant, right?
Yeah.
But today it's still going on. And it's not like we don't know. It's not like we've not talked about it. It's pretty open and obvious, right? I got to say, I was preparing for this hearing, and I had a conversation with my team about your background to come and talk about pornography. The next time I got on X, because I got to check it to know what people are saying, there were people having sex on a beach in Brazil. And I don't look at that stuff. And in the first few things that, again, I had to get away from, but X was feeding me, and you talked about it. You said something to me. You said, it is not cool to criticize Elon. What did you mean by that?
Well, all of
Because
you,
let's be honest and be bipartisan, right?
well, all of you are carrying, for example, surveillance devices with you. This is not. This is a secure phone. We make these for our top level staff. This does not listen. It does not track my location. The devices you carry, they literally listen, record, transmit everything. If you disconnect from your service provider, they're still listening and recording. And the moment you reconnect, they upload everything that they've just stored. And on a lot of phones now, if you turn off the power, they're still listening and still tracking you. Remember a few years ago, you could take the batteries out, and now you can't? They're all soldered in. That's so you can never turn the phone off. You think it's off, all the lights are off, but it's still functioning. So I work with people like yourselves all the time. I have for a long time. I made some very good friendships, but you guys are really slow. Let me tell you, you are so slow. Tech moves so fast, you don't even, they solder in the batteries. No one pays any attention. They solder in the batteries for a reason. It's so that they can track what you're saying, what you're doing, even when you think your phone is off. When we have meetings at my institute, we have Faraday bags and Faraday boxes. We throw all of our electronics into these sealed containers. How many of you here do that as a regular practice? That's a big nobody. Occasionally, okay. Yeah, well, but a lot of you are lawyers, and you chances are you've talked to clients with surveillance devices nearby, and without trying to block these transmissions. I'm just saying, tech moves fast, and that, again, I talk about selling a bill, brings me back to monitoring, because monitoring moves as fast as tech does. Monitoring is tech. It's good tech fighting bad tech, and we're not waiting around for any laws or regulations. We're collecting the evidence, what will be used as evidence. We're collecting it 24 hours a day right this second. Go to americasdigitalshield.com and you'll see. And it's a lot of wonderful, patriotic Americans that have allowed us to build this. It's cost us about $7.5 million so far to build what we have. And this is we're in the fight now, right this second. And that's what you guys have to figure out how to do, is to go faster.
Thank you, Dr. McGee. Thank you. And he mentioned, and I listened as he talked about data, and then Dr. Epstein also got back to the addictive nature, that combination of the addiction will help you get more data, that will help you sell more ads, or help you get more production or a product that is out there. I want to talk to you about the addictive side, because I have seen you come testify on substance abuse and addiction and adolescence. and this brain that doesn't quite fully cook or develop basically until you're 25, right?
Yep.
And I know we're saying 18, and I think that's right. We're talking about 18, but reality is, are you able at this point, because this is relatively new, are you able to figure out what the long-term projection is for this current generation of adolescents that have been tainted by and damaged by some of the things that they're seeing on social media?
No, I mean, we can't have long-term data because everything is so new. I run into the same struggle with e-cigarettes and cancer. Like, it takes a long time to get cancer. It takes a long time to get long-term effects. But I mean, we're reasonable people with common sense, and we can see where this is headed. Once again, when and I think the research on researchers would argue even over the word addiction, right? Because different people have different words of this is not a recognized addiction by the DSM. Social media isn't, gaming is. But this is where I think we just needed to use common sense and look at the world around us and see what our patients are doing, see what their parents are doing. And so no specific research, just common sense and stories over and over and over again. And it's so hard to parent now. It's so hard. I just feel so bad for parents who are in the weeds with this. I'm just out of in the weeds with my young adults. But, it's easy to tell a parent, just say, no screen time. But it's not like telling them you have to finish your homework before you can go play outside. It's addictive. It's drawing them in. And so these parents are just fighting every day. And these are active. I'm talking about even parents who are there and good, stable households and who are active and who are trying. It's miserable. Because the kids
almost
are just
impossible.
fighting. Yeah, it's miserable. We're making parenting miserable.
And we're asking parents to be the guardians around a filter. When you said it best, they created VPN, whatever it was. The company was already prepared to build around the parent's ability to have a filter, right? And that's one of the things that I question on the algorithm, because the algorithm can stop the pimp from getting to the child on the bridge to the two islands, but the algorithm has the ability to also be the one to prevent it, right? So that algorithm issue, it goes both ways, right? They could program it to do a better job, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where sometimes it gets caught up in court with free speech issues.
Sure.
But, I would just say, in my ideal world, you would just see who you follow. If you're a minor and your parents would know who you follow and you would see who you follow and you could connect with your friends and not with outside adults or people you don't know. And I think that would be a wonderful thing.
Want to ask about the addiction and this concept of brain damage or permanency. I know you said we don't have it yet. This population has not aged to 50. Do you have an opinion on the impact that these things are having on brain development long term? I mean, if you could forecast it based on your expertise and what you know, what is your concern for 20, 30 years from now for this generation?
Yeah, it's the inability to hold attention for longer than 3 minutes, TikTok length video. It is when you look at pornography, it's unhealthy relationships and unhealthy standards for relationships. So I think it's harming. It's just staying alone in your room and not having friends. We know that social interaction is such a huge part of being human. And this isn't social interaction. The kids think it is, and it's not. All of us who are old enough to have this experience of healthy relationships knows that this isn't the same thing, but kids are thinking it's the same thing. So, yeah, I think it's a danger to the fabric of our society. And it's, we're seeing, I have older adolescents who parents have let them switch to online school, and all they're doing is sitting in their room doing online school a few hours a day and then video games the rest of the time or TikTok. It cannot be good for their brains.
And let me ask you about that, because something came up when Senator Kolkhorst talked about screen time and just like in school, putting these kids on an iPad, putting them on a screen, and that's basically teaching. How important is recess and kids being brought to a community in a setting to have people that are not just in their home life, but the diversity of experiences and that interaction, that ability for children to play and interact with each other? How important is that to development long term?
Free play is everything to develop.
Right. Tell me about it.
Free play is everything to developing and academic success. So we know that kids need to be out on a playground, making their own rules, policing each other. When you see kids imaginative play, younger kids playing out. I'm a police officer. I'm a teacher. All of this stuff, it's critical to development. So absolutely free play. And once again, screens don't provide that. Or parents think that they get on these learning apps and it's going to teach their children language. You can't get language from a screen. You get language from the face and the parent or the other people interacting with you. So we know that language development doesn't happen that way. So and I think when you talk about screens in schools, they can serve some benefit. That's what's so complicated about this, right? Social media can have benefits. Screens in schools can have benefits because we're preparing them for a future workforce. They need to know how to use Excel. They need to know how to teach my kids how to write an appropriate email, right? This is part of your professional training. But what's the right balance?
And so if we were seeing in some school districts the reduction of recess or the reduction of community time, and we're seeing that happen in Houston, is that something that we should equally be worried about, that we're not giving kids an opportunity to learn and grow in adolescence? We're just forcing them to sit behind a screen and prepare for a test? It scares the hell out of me.
Yes, and American Academy of Pediatrics does have a policy statement on the importance of recess in school. And exercise too, just getting out, exercising. And once again, this has been shown to help academic improvement and just enjoying going to school, not being miserable.
I can't remember if it came up or if I'm just thinking about the book that you referenced, Anxious Generation, but we made a policy decision decades ago for child safety seats or seat belts. Can you imagine if the car industry just said, not going to put them in? Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative.